Close-Up is brought to you by the Kia Sorento R, redefining the power of Kia.
Welcome back. You saw some vision earlier of this country's fight to be nuclear-free, and today marks the day 25 years ago that our very own anti-nuclear legislation was passed in Parliament. Alexi O'Brien met up with long-time campaigner Kate Dews to hear about her part in the anti-nuclear battle.
Pounding the footpaths for decades, it's campaigners like these who pushed for our 25-year-old anti-nuclear law. And for them, the battle began long before 1987.
So some said, hey, we should be activists. And so we did.
I remember Helen Caldecott coming here. She was a doctor with 3 young children, and she said, if you're staying home just looking after your children and cleaning their teeth and worrying about their violin practice and you're not worried about what's happening to the rest of the planet, then you're not being a good mother.
It was the mid-1970s. Prime Minister Rob Muldoon was welcoming American ships, possibly nuclear-powered, into our waters.
And we started to get this little peace squadron together, and it was the most amazing thing to be involved.
1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want no nuclear war.
Kate Dews, a staunch anti-nuclear campaigner, has seen it all.
In the 80s, we were out getting signatures, and so we would go out often with babies and buggies and knock on all the doors.
Oh, we are saying, give peace a chance.
And you can see how many people, Morris dancers in the square and dogs with nuclear-free stickers on them and wonderful banners here of people. We used to take big maps over to the mall and get people to colour your home a nuclear-free zone. In 1984, Muldoon brought in 4 American ships, and so you had people protesting at Littleton and Timaru and Napier and Nelson.
The pressure on the government from the public and Rebel National MP Marilyn Waring forcing a snap election.
That doesn't give you much time to run up to an election, Prime Minister.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
David Lange won, a lawyer who got in on the anti-nuclear ticket. Within days he was having meetings with American Secretary of State George Shultz, pressuring Lange not to rock the boat on the anti-nuclear issue. And it was all about this, ANZUS, a treaty signed in the days after World War II between New Zealand, Australia and the United States over security issues and joint military exercises.
What kind of an alliance is it if the military forces of the countries involved are not able to be in contact with each other?
The Americans, staunch in their rights to nuclear weapons, weren't happy with our new leadership and the rejection of their nuclear ships into our ports.
If the ship is nuclear capable, then it won't come.
But New Zealanders wouldn't be bullied.
Very exciting times to see us standing up and, you know, there's a term, the mouse that roared, or, you know, the little people speaking out. And you felt that we had finally come of age. This one was 1984 and was published in the Washington Post. Dr. Alan Brash, father of Don, but he was also, at one stage, the president of the Peace Foundation.
David Lange told Ronald Reagan the stance wasn't anti-American, it was anti-nuclear, which included the continued French testing in the South Pacific.
France, get out of the Pacific.
Then comes 1985 and a day that shook the country, the bombing of Greenpeace boat the Rainbow Warrior in Auckland Harbour.
I mean, all that did was consolidate our anti-nuclear policy. We were so angry that the nuclear powers would do this to us.
By 1986, relations with the United Nations had frozen. New Zealand denied entry of another US ship, the Buchanan, and ANZUS was effectively over.
And New Zealand has said it will not have nuclear weapons in New Zealand.
Peace groups welcoming the anti-nuclear law on June 8th, 87.
And there was a fear that we would have the Kiwi disease, as they called it, would spread. We called it the Kiwi cure, and it did spread. It went to the Philippines, it went to Ireland, Austria, Mongolia.
But while it's been 25 years, they've had to fight to keep it. In 2004, leader of the opposition, Don Brash, that's right, Dr. Allen's son, was caught saying our anti-nuclear policy would be gone by lunchtime. And in 2010, when US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton visited, the Wellington Declaration was signed, a thawing out of diplomatic relations.
I'm happy that we're still nuclear free, and I'm not terribly happy that the government isn't doing the leadership it has been doing in the past. We shouldn't be in alliance with states that still hold the use of nuclear weapons.
We do not want to be defeated by nuclear weapons.
Alexia O'Brien with Kate Hughes there. Well, former Labor Cabinet Minister and ACT leader Richard Prebble, he was the architect of that anti-nuclear legislation that was passed after 4 readings on June the 8th, 1987. And I spoke with Richard Prebble earlier on today and asked him if the world was a very different place back then.
When I now look back on it, a number of things occur to me. One, the world is so different. So it's hard to explain to someone who's 25 that quarter of a century ago we had this amazing arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States. That's one aspect of it, but the other is that that's really the first time New Zealand decided to make a foreign policy decision in the interests of New Zealand, rather than what we were being told to do, say in London or in Washington.
But what was he, sadly, I am old enough to remember what it was like at the time, but having said that, what have we gained tangibly out of it? Short of the world going, oh, good on you, plucky old New Zealand. But apart from that, what actually happened?
Oh, sure, and I don't think you should over-romanticise it. I don't think we had much impact, if any, on the world. I don't believe that that plucky New Zealand was leading the world, because no one else followed us, nobody else passed a nuclear-free bill. That's not what I think its real significance was. I think the real significance was that a New Zealand Parliament was making foreign policy in the interests of New Zealand.
And have we over-romanticised it to the extent that it hasn't been repealed? And if you can argue that it didn't actually do anything, it could have been repealed, because the damage, especially with the United States, was immeasurable, wasn't it?
The damage was, and we have over-romanticised it. I think that there were mistakes made, not just in Washington but also in Wellington. We could have and should have handled it better. I mean, the incident about the Buchanan, you know, where the Americans searched their whole fleet to find a ship that could never possibly have had a nuclear weapon on it, and here was New Zealand saying we're turning it down because it might have one. I mean, where was it being hidden? You know, I mean, when I look back, that was just botched from beginning to end. But I say, when I look at it now, and I think that its real significance was, first, it was right. I mean, having nuclear weapons in New Zealand didn't make any sense at all. But the other one was that after that, it's very hard for a New Zealand Prime Minister now to get up and say, as was said when we went to the Second World War, where England goes, we go. I mean, you have to give a better reason than that.
You're proud of it, still?
Oh, yes, I am. I'm not proud of all the way it was handled, and I'm sometimes a little ashamed when I see how people wave it around and claim things that are more than it was. But when you look at it, what it really was, it was a significant action for New Zealand in creating us as a nation, and in that sense, I think we've got reason for all of us to be proud of it.
Richard Prebble earlier this afternoon. So some interesting reflections there, looking back a quarter of a century. But with the Cold War well over, of course, and the threat of nuclear war now a distant threat, how relevant is this slice of history to young New Zealanders? I mean, do they care? Should they care? Disarmament researcher Natasha Barnes is with us. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
What's it mean to you?
I think when you say that the threat of the Cold War is a distant memory, it's really not. There are still 20,000 nuclear weapons. There are still 2,000 weapons on high alert. And yes, the Cold War is over, and people think that the threat from an exchange between Russia and the US is gone. But there's still the threat of an accidental explosion, or that terrorists or rogue states could get a hold of these weapons.
Wouldn't the main threat be somebody like Iran, maybe like North Korea? And when you look at those threats, really they could be contained. They're not serious threats. They're potential threats, but no one's freaking out about it, not like the Cold War.
Not like the Cold War. So it's not as present in young New Zealanders' minds, but it's still very much an issue. And the reasons why states like Syria or Iran or North Korea pursue nuclear programs is because they feel a threat. And there is an inconsistency in the global nuclear security architecture that needs to be addressed. You've got the former Cold War warriors, George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, and President Obama recognising that this current context is totally unsustainable, and that the security of a nuclear weapons-free world is actually the preferred option.
Well, let's agree that they're a threat. Let's agree we need to be worried about it. Does the fact that we passed a law 25 years ago, short of the nostalgia factor that we seem to love about it, has it made one jot of difference to the world and its nuclear weapons and any potential threat between anybody?
Well, I think New Zealand has played a role. There's a group of small and middle power states, Sweden, South Africa, Norway, Mexico. New Zealand was part of a group called the New Agenda Coalition. We still are. In the year 2000, at the global meeting of states on nuclear weapons, all states agreed to unequivocally undertake the commitment to disarm. So it's all on paper, it's all been committed. I think New Zealand was instrumental. One of our diplomats, Clive Pearson, was critical to getting that agreement passed. We have continued to be a role model. There are, as Kate said in the presentation before, the Philippines, Austria, Mongolia, they've taken on the New Zealand model.
Well, I saw that and I thought to myself, yay, Mongolia took it on. Who cares, really?
Well, Mongolia's kind of in a strategic position, right between China and the US. Mongolia's not far separated from Kazakhstan. They're also a nuclear weapons-free zone. There are now, New Zealand in 1987 was one of the first. I think we were number 4 as a nuclear weapons-free zone. There are now 115 states, 56% of the Earth's land area, and I think that's about 2.7 billion people saying we reject the threat from nuclear weapons. They're morally indefensible.
25 years on. I appreciate your time, Natasha, very much. Natasha Barnes from what they call DACPAC.